Greetings, friends, and welcome to my guide on the Unending Coil of Bahamut Ultimate. This encounter is based around the first raid tier of the game, and since not everyone attempting to challenge this fight played during that time, I'll go over all the mechanics as if they were brand new. This fight is extremely difficult in comparison to the other raids that are currently in the game, so I would come into this with a lot of patience. Not everyone will be able to complete this encounter, so while patience is definitely necessary, strategies and members may need to be adjusted throughout the progression of this fight if mistakes are reoccurring. With that being said, it's best to approach this encounter with all raid members having the same mentality and willingness to complete the fight. There are many different strategies that can be used for all different phases of this encounter. While I will not be covering every single strategy out there, I will be going over the ones that work best for me and my raid groups. In the description below, I will incorporate different POVs and strats not mentioned in this video. Some strategies may work better for different raid teams, so experiment, talk it out, and find out which strategy will work best for you and your group. The first boss is Twintania, and throughout the entire encounter the wall will kill you instantly if you touch it, so be careful. I would highly recommend pre-shielding with Veil and Spread Adlo for the upcoming raid damage. This also helps you ensure you build enough LB for later in the encounter. I would also recommend setting up markers for reference points. These help throughout the fight. For example, set down ABC to help position for neural links, and 1 and 2 for later in the fight. Throughout this phase, Twintania will drop a Neuralink after reaching 74, 44, and 0%. These Neuralinks should be placed in specific places around the center of the arena. They will be used for this phase and other phases as well. Put down markers to make it easier to position the boss. When you step in these Neuralinks, they will give you damage and healing down. The damage down is huge, but the healing down is only about 10%. Twin has 3 main mechanics before the first Neuralink is dropped: Twister, Fireball, and Death Sentence. She will also do a frontal, hard-hitting physical tank cleave called Plummet. Twister places a green tornado underneath 4 random players at the end of its cast. If a person steps in it, it will explode, killing the player and everyone else around that person. To dodge this, you can either run out, then back in while not retracing your steps, similar to a J formation, or move in a straight line around 75% through the cast. The important part is, never retrace your own or anyone else's path. Fireball. A red marker will go over a random DPS or healer. This is a stack mechanic and meant to be shared with the group. With shields and heavy mitigation, you can survive a 6-person stack, but unless you are trying to build limit break faster, just have everyone stack. If the marked player dies, the fireball will target a random person. Twister will be paired with Fireball, so spread out around the boss, dodge your Twister, then take the Fireball stack inside Twin or to the back. Either will work fine. Following this will be Death Sentence. This is a hard-hitting physical tank buster that applies a slashing resistance down debuff. This forces a tank swap. Use heavy mitigation to survive. Twintania's auto attacks are slashing, but her plummets are not. Upon reaching 74%, Twin will drop her first Neuralink. Have the tank move her to the next location. In addition to all the previous mechanics, she will now add in Liquid Hell and Generate. For Liquid Hell, Twintania will spit 5 consecutive fire AoEs on the ground. These are aimed at anyone outside a very specific range. If you step into the AoE after it is placed, it will inflict a fire dot that will kill you instantly. You should assign 1 to 2 people to bait these Liquid Hells out on the edge of the arena. Have everyone else be somewhat close to Twin except for your designated baiter. This will satisfy the certain range requirement and force her to target the baiter. Make sure to not cover up the Neuralink with fire AoEs. They will persist around 15 seconds. You want to have 2 designated baiters in case your first baiter gets targeted with a mechanic and you need to move in closer. Generate will mark a random DPS with purple orbs in the formation of a triangle. Shortly after this, a dark sphere will appear underneath Twintania. This hatch will move slowly towards that player. If it hits the player, the hatch will explode and wipe the raid. To counter this, the marked player must step inside the Neuralink and gain the buff before taking the hit. It may take a moment before you get the buff, so be in early, don't step in last second. The explosion is wide, about the size of a liquid hell AoE, so no one besides the marked player should be near the Neuralink. The explosion will also put a debuff on the marked player called mana hypersensitivity. This means that the next hatch hit will be lethal as long as the debuff persists on that player. If the orb is up for too long, it will explode on its own. And finally, if the marked player dies before exploding the hatch, it will target another player at random. Every other generate will be paired with a twister. When this happens, bait the twister first, then step inside the Neuralink to explode the hatch. If one of your liquid hell baiters are targeted for the generate, have the other bait the liquid hells. Once Twin reaches 44%, another Neuralink will drop. Move her to the last location. This final part of Twin is very similar to the first half, except Generate will now target 2 DPS and have 2 hatches, and you can no longer bait every liquid hell. Every other liquid hell will go on a random player other than the main tank. Healers may need to heal the liquid hell target if they are required to stack for fireball, so keep that in mind. Handle all of the mechanics the same way as before. With the 2 hatches, have DPS call which hatch they are going to. You can call markers or Neuralinks. 2 DPS cannot go in the same Neuralink. The people baiting should also be vocal because if they get a hatch, another will have to bait for them. During the liquid hells and fireball, that fireball target may also be targeted with liquid hells. If this happens, bait the liquid hells out a little bit and then come back into stack with the fireball. People will need to be aware and ready to adjust for this because it will happen, and it is also possible for a DPS to be targeted with hatch, then liquid hell, then a fireball. If this happens, abandon all hopes of doing any damage and just focus on the mechanics so you don't put liquid hells in places you don't want them and you have a clear path back to the fireball stack. You may also use the front of Twin near the wall where the tank is for another place to put the liquid hells. Twintania enrages around 3 minutes, and slightly before the enrage will be a death sentence. Whatever tank you want to be tanking Nail in the next phase needs to have threat before Twintania flies away and disappears from the enemy list, so set vokes and shirks up appropriately. Once Twin is defeated, group up and stack about halfway between the center of the arena and the edge. If Neuralinks are placed correctly, you can use them as a guideline or place down markers beforehand. Phase 2 starts with Heaven's Fall. This will knock you back. The damage is proximity based, so you can't be too close to the center and you can't be too far out or else you will be knocked into the wall. Time a heal so that it lands as you get knocked back, topping up the group. You can accomplish this by casting right as the arena changes. Immediately following the knockback, yellow line AoEs will appear on the floor, dividing the arena into pie slices. You'll need to spread out. Ideally, you'll want 2 people per slice with the current tank somewhat close to the middle. Also, during this time, Nail will do 2 sets of meteor streams targeting 4 players per set. Make sure to not be too close to people because these streams do splash damage. After the first set of AoEs go off, another set will appear in the safe zone, forcing you to move. Have the whole group move clockwise or counterclockwise so no one is overstacking safe zones. This is accompanied by a second set of meteor streams. Once the streams and AoEs are finished, stay away from the tank with the highest threat. Nail will drop down on that person with Dalman Dive, followed by Bahamut's Claws. Dalman Dive is a very hard-hitting AoE around the player, and Bahamut's Claws are 5 successive moderate hits resulting in a lot of damage. Either mitigate this heavily or use Invuln. During this phase, there will be multiple mechanics happening at the same time, so try your best to focus on what you need to do. This phase can be very confusing and in my opinion one of the hardest in this encounter. Nail will start with Bahamut's Favor, increasing her damage. 5 dragons will also appear in random locations on the outside edge of the arena. These locations they spawn will matter later on for the dive bomb mechanic. These dragons will also periodically affect the party with Thunderstruck, Ice Balls, Fire Tether, Wings of Salvation, and Doom. Nail will also say specific lines of text indicating upcoming mechanics. These quote mechanics will appear over her character model and in the chat log, so make sure to have the NPC dialogue turned on. Okay, now that is a lot of stuff going on at the same time. We'll go over it slow and in order. First thing that will happen is Thunderstruck and a quote. Thunderstruck will put a lightning debuff on 2 random players. This debuff will count down and explode, dealing massive damage and inflicting paralysis on everyone but the target. The quotes come in pairs, and one will be chosen at random. Here are all the quotes and dragon mechanics. So for each quote mechanic, periodically throughout this phase, Nail will choose one from a possible 2. I would highly recommend getting ACT triggers for this. In the description below, I will have my ACT setup guide. When Thunderstruck goes out, handle it first by having one player go to the back left and the other to the back right. The first quote will always be Lunar Dynamo and then either stack for Thermionic Beam or get out for Chariot. Thermionic Beam is a shared raid damaging ability that requires you to stack up. Iron Chariot is a very fast, huge AoE around Nail, resulting in instant death if you're hit by this. Once the Thunderstruck resolves, the Lunar Dynamo will go off. After this, either get out for Chariot or stack up for Thermionic Beam. This is immediately followed by the Fire Tether, Ice Balls, Wings of Salvation, and Doom debuffs. Don't worry about the Ice Balls too much because there isn't anything you can do about them. Focus on the Fire Tethers, and once you have this down, it will be as if the Ice Balls aren't even there. For the Fire Tethers, there are different ways to do this. I would recommend in, out, in, because if a player dies, it will reduce the risk of others dying from multiple Ice Balls. A good rule for the Fire Tether is that if you are chosen for the tether, do not take the next fire in. I would suggest having a designated stack point for the Fire Tethers. For example, we do ours in the middle with the exception of the first because we may have to run through the boss if we need to stack for Thermionic Beam. If it's Chariot, the Fire Tether will be in the middle. The 3rd and 4th Fire Tether will always be in the middle as well, and it is up to each person to check their debuff and stack or not stack. We will always take the 2nd fire to the back of the boss, and if for some reason people miss the 1st, they can easily grab the 2nd because it will be in a static location. Now with all that being said, to simplify it, all players must be hit by 2 Fire Tethers throughout this phase to not die from double ice. If you get a Fire Tether, it's safe to never take the next fire in, and the 4th Fire Tether can also be taken regardless as long as you don't have Fire Scorch debuff. All of this is assuming no one has died. If people die, it messes up the order of Ice Balls, so you may need to take an extra Fire Tether to be sure you don't die to double ice. After the first Wings of Salvation set, there will be Bahamut's Claws, so make sure to keep your eye on the tank's health. This is followed by the 2nd Fire Tether and 2 Thunderstrucks. Take this tether to the back and spread out for lightning. There are many different ways to spread lightnings, but the most common is to call left and right, separating them out on the sides of the boss or far away. Talk about it as a group and figure out which works best for you. There will probably be a lot of trial and error until you get comfortable. You can also put down markers and call out specific places for the lightnings to go to. After this will be the 2nd Nail quote. Following this quote mechanic will be another set of Fire Tethers, Ice Balls, Dooms, White Puddles, and Lightning. All of this is very similar to last time. There will also be more Bahamut Claws here. Try and remember to do what you need to do. Every mechanic is timed in a way to never overlap, meaning that sometimes you will get the Fire Tether, Lightning, and Doom all in succession, and as long as you focus, there will be time to complete all of them. Be very vocal with Thunders and Doom Puddles. Sometimes you have to cleanse Doom immediately following the lightning explosion, so make sure your group knows this so you aren't too far away from the cleansing puddle. The 2nd Doom cleanse should always be avoided with the exception of the person that needs it because the lightning goes off around the same time. The Doom needs to be cleansed. In this case, that person must have priority to grab their cleanse and will not have the luxury of working around lightning targets, so it's very important to be vocal about cleansing and lightning. After this set of elements will be the 3rd quote mechanic. This time, it will introduce a new ability called Raven's Dive. Nail will target a random party member and dive towards them, dealing low damage and knocking back anyone else near the person in a small AoE. To deal with this, simply do a loose spread around the boss, making sure to not be too far out from each other. Nail will always do dive and then either chariot or lunar dynamo, so after the dive, you will either have to get out or get close, depending on the quote. Immediately following this quote will be another set of elements. Handle this like the previous sets, making sure to keep an eye on the fire debuffs and being vocal about doom cleansing and thunders. The fire in is pretty tricky with the thunders going off very soon after stacking with fire, so be sure to have your thunders go to their designated spots. This basically splits the party up into 3 groups, 2 thunders and everyone not affected by thunder, so be sure that the group is not moving in the direction of the thunders. Once the elements resolve, Nail will cast Raven's Beak. This is a hard-hitting tank buster applying piercing resistance down debuff, forcing you to tank swap. After the beak, 3 dive bomb markers will go out over random players in succession. They will never target the main tank. In addition to dive bombs, another quote mechanic will happen as the first player gets marker for the dive bombs. Okay, so for dive bombs, you need to designate a person in the group to mark them. Starting from true north, or 12 o'clock, the first dive will be the first 2 dragons. The second dive will be the 3rd dragon by itself, and the 3rd dive will be the last 2 dragons. 3 dives in total. Here are some examples of dive bomb patterns. When marking dive bombs, never put A or B in the path of each other. You can put C in the path of A and B in the path of C because of the extra time it takes for C to dive. You can look for and mark dive bombs as early as the Bahamut's favor cast near the beginning of the phase, which is right when the dragons appear. I would suggest doing it sooner rather than later because there isn't much going on at the very start of this phase. While placing dive bombs, Nail will throw out 4 supernovas. These are basically Nail's version of Liquid Hell. 2 will target the first marked player and the last 2 will target the second marked player for dive bombs. These have a long animation delay, but if these are stepped in, they will put a dot on you that kills you instantly. The first marked player should feel free to place their dive bomb right away because the marker disappears before the supernova resolves. The second marked player should bait out the first supernova to the left or right of the dive bomb placement first, then place your dive bomb. You want to do this because the marker will not disappear before the 3rd supernova resolves. If not done correctly, this could result in a dive bomb misplaced, or you dying to the dot. During the dive bombs, there will be another quote mechanic. The first dive bomb will go off and then the first part of the quote. Make sure the tank is top tier because of the upcoming Dalman dive. The second dive will go out, then the second part of the quote. And finally, the last dive bomb will happen. If it was meteor streams, you'll need to do a loose spread in the middle. The off tank needs to be topped because if they are hit with a stream, it will do massive damage due to the piercing resistance down debuff from Raven's Beak. If it is thermionic beam, simply stack in the middle. The main tank should get out of the stack around max melee and then restack after the Dalman dive happens. This is immediately followed by more Bahamut's Claws, so make sure to keep your eye on the tank. And finally, stay away from the main tank because of the Dalman dive. This is followed by 2 more quote mechanics. These quotes can be any of her previous quotes except for the ones used during dive bombs, so be prepared for thermionic beam, chariot, dive, and or lunar dynamo. After the last quote, Nail will do another Raven's Beak. This works the same as before. After this beak, there will be more Bahamut's Claws, followed by Enrage. This phase can be pushed early. Once reaching 0%, Nail will fly away. Once again, stack inside a Neuralink or marker, making sure you are halfway between the middle and the edge of the arena. Everyone will need to be topped and shielded. Bahamut will come down with 7th Umbral Era, knocking all players back and also dealing damage across 3 Calamitous Flame Bursts. This is followed by Calamitous Blaze, requiring tank LB2 as a minimum to survive. As soon as you get knocked back, pop tank LB. If it's LB2, spam heal to be safe. But if it's LB3, you have a lot more mitigation and it's not needed.
You should also use passage of arms here. One more thing to note, do not touch the huge fireball surrounding Bahamut. If you do, it will put a burn dot on you that will kill you instantly. Bahamut will have threat on whoever last had threat on Nail. Bahamut will also do Flare Breath, followed by Flatten.
Flare Breath is a heavy-hitting conal magical attack. This is weaved in between autos, so expect a lot of burst damage. Flatten is a physical tank buster dealing massive damage. Make sure to either mitigate or invuln this. After these two attacks, Bahamut will begin to cast Quick March Trio, and then fly away, becoming untargetable. The group needs to be topped and shielded because there is a lot of raid damage coming up. Now there are a lot of different strategies to handle this trio and all the other trios, but I will only be covering the ones my raid groups used. I will also have different POVs and strats in the description below, and would encourage you to talk about this as a group to figure out positioning that works best for you, because not every team may want to handle things the same way for every trio. During the trio cast, make sure that everyone is stacked in mid. This will make it easier to find the dive and move appropriately. You will also want to shield for this by using Veil, Adlo, etc. Quick March Trio will start with Nail, Bahamut, and Twin diving through the middle of the arena. This is also accompanied with Twisters, Mega Flare, Tempest Wing, and Earthshakers. For the dive, we put 4 people on the left and 4 people on the right. We do Healer, Tank, Tank, Healer on the left, and all DPS on the right. Move to your spot immediately. Once you see them start to dive, or by the end of the Mega Flare dive cast, you need to move in about halfway between the center and the edge of the arena, because there will be a twister at the end of the dive. This will also bait any potential Mega Flare circles outside of the middle. Next there will be Mega Flare. Mega Flare consists of 3 parts: ground AoEs, moderate splash damage that will target random players, and other players will be marked to share damage. In this trio, DPS will always be targeted for the Mega Flare stack. This will happen with 3 Earthshaker markers, 2 on healers and 1 on a DPS, and 2 green Tempest Wing tethers appearing on random players that will need to be picked up by the tanks. Earthshaker will mark a player for a huge conal attack dealing moderate damage and applying a stack of earth resistance down, making the second hit lethal. These will leave behind puddles as well, don't step in them. Tempest Wing will be green tethers spawning on random players. These need to be picked up by both tanks. Get away from the tanks when they have these. After about 5 seconds, they will detonate in an AoE explosion, causing high damage and knockback. If you have a tether, you cannot pick up another one. Be very aware when picking these up and try to plan your movements ahead of time. Tempest Wing gives plenty of time to resolve. These are the positions we use for all the mechanics on this trio. Okay, so mechanics will resolve and be handled in this order. Move to your location, dive goes off, then move in halfway to bait out ground AoEs and dodge twisters. DPS will be marked to stack for Mega Flare. Healers and 1 DPS will be marked for Earthshaker. Get to your locations. Mega Flare stack will go off. Earthshakers will go off, and then finally the Tempest Wing will resolve. It's okay for tanks to get hit by the Earthshaker as well as the Tempest Wing as long as they are topped and do not get hit by the Mega Flare stack. Immediately following this, Bahamut will do another Flare Breath and Flatten. This will also be followed by Blackfire Trio. During the Blackfire Trio cast, make sure everyone is stacked in middle again and shielded. After the cast finishes, Bahamut, Nail, and Twin will appear in a random spot forming a triangle outside of the arena. A random player will be marked with a red dive bomb indicating who Bahamut is targeting. If stacked correctly, this will bait Bahamut directly through the middle. During this time, look for Nail on the outside edge to orient yourself. Shortly after this, Twintania will start spitting liquid hells on the party. Once the first one hits the group, start moving straight towards Nail, do not sprint. After the second liquid hell, Nail will target a random player with Thermionic Beam. If stacked and moving together correctly, this will be shared between all players about halfway to Nail. The beam will hit about the same time as the third liquid hell. When you get to the wall, you will split up as a group. Facing Nail from the middle, tanks and healers will go left and DPS will go right. 4 Mega Flare towers will spawn on the cardinal directions. 4 players will also be targeted with a Mega Flare stack. There will always be 2 DPS, 1 tank, and 1 healer for the Mega Flare stack. For the towers, they must have a player inside of them when they disappear. If they do not, they will explode and wipe the raid. When grabbing a tower during this part, wait on the outside near the edge and watch Nail. She will throw 4 supernovas. After the first one, move into the tower. When you move in, place your body on the edge so that if you get targeted by the second supernova, you can run to the opposite side of the tower to avoid the nova and still be in the tower. The towers will explode, dealing low damage around the same time as the second supernova goes out. If the Mega Flare stack gets targeted by a supernova, simply move left or right as a group and you'll be fine. Here is a diagram of how we handle things. Bahamut will reappear and start casting Giga Flare. Before moving back into the middle, make sure the liquid hells disappear and bait out all 4 supernovas somewhat close to the edge of the arena. Giga Flare is a hard-hitting magical raid-wide damaging ability. Make sure people are topped and shielded for this. Tanks should also be using Reprisal here. After this, Bahamut will do 3 flare breaths in a row. This is a lot of damage, so use heavy cooldowns and mitigation for these. Bahamut will then begin to cast Fel Ruin Trio. For Fel Ruin Trio, you'll want to have a reference point and predetermined positions. After the trio cast finishes, Bahamut, Twin, and Nail will all spawn in a triangle formation near the center of the arena. I would suggest the group finding Bahamut and making him the reference point. Spread out around the inside of the 3 neural links while trying not to go outside of them. It's okay to go out a little bit around Nail, but try and not go too far out. The tank's position should always be in front of Bahamut. This will make grabbing tethers a bit easier. You can practice your positions in an open arena outside of the instance to prepare yourself ahead of time. Nail will do 1 of 2 possible quote mechanics. So it's either lunar then dive, or dive then lunar, with meteor stream always third. The positions you want are for the dive and meteor streams. Tanks will also want a predetermined Neuralink as well as the party for the Etheric Perfusion. Etheric Perfusion is a high damaging raid ability that requires you to be inside a Neuralink to survive. You can also use twister positions, protein positions, or any type your group wants. Just be sure to have set locations and everyone knows where to go. Do not have people spread too far from Bahamut because when the first part of the quote mechanic goes out, tanks will need to pick up Tempest Wing tethers and then stack inside Neuralinks. If people are too far out, the tanks will not be able to run to their Neuralink. After the lunar or dive, tanks will grab tethers and make their way to the appropriate Neuralink. The group takes the Neuralink opposite from Bahamut. There will be a lot of raid damage here, so make sure people are topped and shielded. You can even have a healer position themselves inside the Neuralink to precast a heal while the other uses swift cast as the Etheric Perfusion ends. The healing down isn't bad, only 10%. During the meteor streams, Bahamut will begin to cast another Giga Flare. Reprisal this one as well. Immediately following this will be Flare Breath and a Flatten. After this is Heaven's Fall Trio. Stack up again in the middle. Nail, Bahamut, and Twin will all appear next to each other on the outside edge of the arena, similar to the first trio, so you'll have to turn your camera and find them. This time, only Twin and Bahamut will dive. One player will be marked with a red dive bomb and another will be marked with a green one. You'll want to be stacked in mid so that these are baited through the center. Just like on the first trio, you'll want to go to your positions. Now for this, there are 3 different dive patterns. When the group runs out of the middle, you can pretty much keep the same positions from Quick March and a small change if Nail is in the middle. These are what the dives look like. The dodging is almost identical. Dodge to the wall, then halfway in to avoid the twister. After the dive, 8 Mega Flare towers will spawn on the edge of the arena. This is followed by Heaven's Fall. So to execute this properly, you need predetermined towers to grab and a point of orientation. The first thing to do is find Nail. That should be where everyone looks to orient themselves. Assign people towers based on Nail's location, meaning from Nail, start counting towers going clockwise 1 through 8. A tower may spawn on Nail, and if this is the case, you must decide as a group if it's going to be 1 or 8. For instance, if a tower spawns on Nail in our group, that counts as 8. Here's an example. After finding your tower, you must position yourself in a way to be between the middle and the edge so that the heavens fall will knock you into your tower. It looks a lot harder than it actually is, and the mechanic gives you a lot of time to position yourself correctly. Just make sure to not be too close to the center, and I would strongly recommend using Tank LB3 here while learning. This will save you a lot of wipes if 1 or 2 people miss their towers. Following the towers will be ground AoEs that travel clockwise or counterclockwise. Nail will also be throwing out supernovas, and Twin will mark a random player for fireball. To handle this, bait out the first supernova on the edge while dodging the ground AoE. Once this is done, start to head toward the center, and when the heavens fall disappears, stack in the middle, which will be underneath Bahamut to split the fireball. I would recommend sacrificing the fireball while learning if you have multiple people dead. If you don't have everyone alive and shielded, you run the risk of killing multiple people. Once the fireball resolves, Bahamut will cast another Giga Flare. Handle this the same as before. After the Giga Flare, Bahamut will do another 3 flare breaths. This is then followed by the next trio. For 10 strike trio, you'll want predetermined positions for Neurolinks. It should look something like this. Twin will come down and release 3 hatches on random players. You'll want the 3 marked people to soak in separate Neurolinks. Twin will then release another set of 3 which must be intercepted by 3 different people. You can set players to move in the case where 2 tanks, both healers, or 3 DPS are targeted. This way you can minimize the chance of people going to the same Neurolinks. So for instance, have 1 tank and healer always stay and 1 move in the case of multiple jobs of the same not being targeted. After the first hatch is soaked, have the marked player run straight back. If you move to the left or to the right, it will make the hatch curve around the player trying to intercept. The players receiving the first soak need to be extra careful to not be hit by the hatch explosion. During the hatches, Nail will also be doing single dives in succession, starting with DPS, then healers and tanks. Following the second set of hatch explosions, players should start to move in to receive healing. Bahamut will come down and target 4 people for Earthshakers. Spread these out in a K-like formation. Immediately following this, the other 4 people will be targeted. Spread these out on the opposite side. Here's a diagram to make things easy. The first 4 players targeted will have to adjust on the fly, but since people are already somewhat spread out, you can set up priority systems like tanks always north and healers always to the sides. It doesn't have to be this exactly because it will vary from group to group, but a system will help things make it a little more consistent. After the second set of Earthshakers, Bahamut will cast a Giga Flare. Handle this the same as before. This is followed by another Flatten and Flare Breath. Now this is the last time you will be able to attack Bahamut. If he is not below 60% the last phase, will do insane amounts of damage and impossible to clear. However, that doesn't mean give up. There is still some of the encounter you can practice. Only worry about pushing Bahamut below 60% when you reach the final phase. Until then, just focus on learning. Next is Grand Octet. Make sure you are stacked in the middle for the upcoming mechanics. Okay, so this looks really overwhelming at first, but it is not as hard as it initially appears. There will be all 5 dragons from Nail's phase, Twin, Bahamut, and Nail, all spawn on the outside edge of the arena. They will all dive bomb in succession, starting with Nail, then the 5 dragons, then Bahamut, then Twin. To make things easy, find Bahamut. After locating Bahamut, find the direct opposite of him, and that is where you will move after the first dive bomb marker goes out. If he is on a cardinal direction, you will run counterclockwise after the first dodge. If he is on an intercardinal direction, you will run clockwise. When you see the first dive marker go out, start to move to the location. If Nail is there, you will have to move 1 space to the left or right, depending on which direction you are running to avoid Nail's dive. This diagram should help. During the dives as you are running, the last 2 dives will be Bahamut and then Twin. It is very important to watch who gets dive bombs because you must bait the Twin dive a very specific way. After the Bahamut dive bomb marker goes out, the only person who has not gotten a dive bomb marker will be Twin's dive. No one will get 2 unless people are dead. At the same time, a Mega Flare stack and towers will spawn. To handle this, we take the Twin dive bomb to the right of Twin and the Mega Flare stack to the left. Twin's dive bomb works like Nail's and Bahamut's,
where the position is locked upon going out. This means the person must be in place before the marker appears to bait correctly. Sometimes the twin dive will also get a Mega Flare stack, and in these cases, you need to be in position for the dive, then move across to stack for Mega Flare. The mechanic gives you plenty of time to handle this. Mega Flare will target 2 DPS, 1 tank, and 1 healer. You can also put down a 1 marker here to help locate the stack and dodge positions for after twins dive. For the towers, spread out and be extremely vocal on who is grabbing which. Try to take the far ones first and save the closer ones for twin marked player or someone from the stack. Remember that as the towers are disappearing, there will be a twister, so make sure to run across the tower or along the inside of it, not only to grab the tower, but also to dodge the twister. After the dive, towers, and twisters, nail and twin will come back down, and this will be the adds phase. Okay, in this phase, you will fight nail and twin together, and they will need to die at virtually the same time. There is also a hard enrage after 2 full cycles or rotations. Whoever had aggro on Bahamut will have aggro on both of them at the start of this phase. Have the tank without threat voke one of them. The positioning of the adds should be in between 2 neural links. We tank them northwest. You'll also want positions for the raid similar to twister positions from the very first phase. Keep in mind that there are 3 neural links and 3 hatch explosions going off in this phase, so positions will need to be adjusted slightly. This phase will have almost everything from Nail and Twin's previous phases. Start with Caster LB3 here. Nail will do Bahamut's Claw and Twin will plummet at the start. This is followed by Liquid Hells, 3 Hatch Generate, and Twister. Handle all of these just like before. Nail will then do a new quote mechanic. This is a 3-part quote and will be one of the following. If Nail starts with a lunar quote, it will be the opposite on the next rotation, and vice versa. Handle this quote the same as before. The only difference is that this time there will be 3 mechanics in succession instead of 2. Spread out for dive, get out for chariot, etc. We put down a 1 marker here in between them to help identify the stack marker more easily. The thermionic beam stack will require the group to be healthy. Pay attention to the twin tank, they will take extra damage from autos. Then immediately following this quote will be another twister followed by Mega Flare. Nail's Mega Flare is a hard-hitting magical raid damaging ability. Use Reprisal on this. Now simultaneously, Nail will do Raven's Beak and Twin will do Death Sentence. These are the same as before, except both tanks need to voke the other boss and both tanks will take a lot of damage here. This will take you into the second rotation. More Bahamut's Claws go out here as well as a plummet. These happen immediately, so be sure to not have Twin face toward the group during the tank swap. This rotation is very similar to the last. Liquid Hells and then 3 Hatch Generate will happen after the plummet paired with a twister. Another Nail quote will go out here and it will start with the opposite from the first one. After this quote mechanic will be another twister. This is followed up by another Raven's Beak and Death Sentence. This will require another tank swap. Following this will be Mega Flare from Nail. The adds need to be dead here or close to being dead. When 1 dies or 2 complete cycles finish, they will start to enrage. Upon killing them both, Bahamut will cast Terra Flare and kill the party. After a pretty awesome cinematic with Phoenix, the party will be resurrected and you will enter the final phase. If people die towards the end of killing the adds, do not res them, assuming you can kill Nail and Twin on time. The reason for this is when Phoenix revives everyone, they will not have weakness. Upon entering this phase, the group will be granted with the Phoenix Blessing buff. This buff will double all of your damage. It is extremely important that no one dies in this phase to ensure you meet the DPS check. The DPS check is not too hard to meet assuming everyone is alive. The Phoenix Blessing will not persist through death. On the surface, this phase seems very simple with easy mechanics, but it requires almost flawless gameplay and execution. Morn Afah. Massive AoE damage targeting a random player. This is meant to be shared between everyone in the raid group and must be mitigated correctly. There are 5 Morn Afahs total in this phase before the Enrage cast. This is the recommended mitigation and CD usage. This isn't the only way to mitigate these, just one way. Discuss this with your team to find out the best way to do this because not every raid group will have the exact same composition. Typically,
For each Morn Afah, you want to plan out 2 times 10% reductions in addition to Soil plus Reprisal plus Succor or Spread Adlo. Morn. This is a tank buster dealing massive damage across multiple hits. Morn adds an additional hit for each Morn cast in the phase. This is meant to be split between the 2 tanks or invuln. You'll want to plan these out beforehand as well. Here's how we handle them. The first Morn, we Holmgang. The second Morn, we use Bulwark, APOC on the Paladin, Rampart, Vengeance, and Thrill. Make sure to use the 2-minute a little early so they come back in time for the last. The third Morn, we Hollowed Ground, and the fourth Morn, we use every cooldown. The final mechanic in this phase is called Exaflare. This spawns 3 waves of 2 AoE circle indicators on a random side of the arena. These travel through the middle in a straight line and may overlap each other slightly. Unless you're a tank, you will die if you get hit by these, and even then, there is no guarantee you will live. These also apply damage down if you survive. One of the safest ways to dodge this is to run to the wall and stand beside the AoE indicator, then move in when you see the animation of the explosion. You can also dodge these by standing in the middle, but it is a little more tricky. Each wave after the first is 2 pulses behind the next, so when dodging, try to position yourself in a way that you're standing next to the first wave but in the path of wave 3. This will give you the most time to dodge. However, it isn't required. This phase is extremely simple on paper, but when you're this far into a fight, requiring almost perfect execution can be taxing. The DPS check in this phase isn't too difficult, but you will not be able to make it if you have deaths due to the Phoenix Blessing buff not persisting. The rotation for this phase is really simple as well, and there are only 3 different mechanics, so stay focused and try to remain calm. But most of all, play safe and go for the clear. As I stated in the beginning of this video, come into this encounter with a lot of patience because this will take some time to complete. And lastly, I would like to thank all of my friends and raid members for their opinions, guidance, and determination for not only helping me clear this fight, but for helping me make this video. I hope you found this helpful and will lead to some sweet first clears. Peace, guys.